Welcome to Brainish English Stories.
A small light was on in the room, shining softly on a table full of bottles and boxes. A young man sat in a big chair near the table and bed. He looked very tired, but when he touched the forehead of the little boy lying in bed, his face lit up with happiness. The boy was sick, but now his fever was going down. The man, named Louis Floride, was a strong and determined person. He worked as a deputy attorney in Paris and had been taking care of his sick son for 2 weeks without ever being late for work. His son was the most important thing to him, especially because his wife had left them. He had loved his wife and son very much, but his wife left him suddenly 2 years ago, leaving him heartbroken. Despite his pain, Louis worked hard and focused on taking care of his son. He tried to forget his wife, but it was hard because their son looked like her. Louis worked during the day and stayed with his son at night, giving him all the love he could. In the 2 years since his life fell apart, Louis had struggled to find a reason to keep going. His son Raymond was the only thing that kept him going. Without Raymond, he might have become very strict and tough like the laws he worked with. He couldn't forget about Jacqueline, but he tried hard to remember only the bad things she did. In the past 2 weeks, he had thought a lot about her. He imagined how things would have been different if she had stayed. They could have taken care of Raymond together and found comfort in each other. They would have been happy when Raymond started feeling better. But she didn't love him, and she didn't love their son. She had left them both behind. Rose, who had worked in the house since Louis got married, quietly came in and told him that Madame Varin was waiting for him in the library. Louis got up with a sigh, took one last look at his sleeping son, and left the room quietly, closing the door behind him. Madame Varin was a cheerful young widow, the sister of Dr. Chennel, who took care of Raymond like he was his own child. Madame Varin also cared a lot for Raymond and had a special fondness for Louis, who had some gray hair. Everyone in Passy thought Louis's wife was dead because she left him while he was living in Paris, and then he moved to Passy. He greeted Madame Varin warmly as he entered the room. "Thank you for coming, Madame Varin," he said with gratitude. The young woman smiled happily as she looked up at him and squeezed his hand. "I'm so glad to hear the good news Rose told me," she said excitedly. "Yes," Louis replied with a tired smile. "It's been a tough time. I don't think I could have lasted much longer." "You've been through a lot," she said sympathetically. "It hasn't been easy, and I can never thank your brother enough for all he's done for us," Louis said, his voice shaking with emotion. "He's been focused on Raymond for weeks. He's always talking about him," Madame Varin said, shaking her head. "2 days ago, he even went to see one of his old teachers to ask for advice. He worked late into the night trying different treatments." Louis nodded. "He told me that's when he came up with the idea that saved Raymond's life. I owe my son's life to your brother, Madame Varin," he said, his voice full of gratitude. "I'll never forget what he's done for us." "He's just happy to help," she replied gently. "He really cares about Raymond." Louis smiled warmly. "And you?" "I love that boy," she exclaimed. "He loves you too," Louis assured her. "You were the first person he asked for when he started feeling better. Now that we're alone for a moment, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart." "Thanking me? Why?" she asked. "For being a good friend," Louis replied. You're being silly, she laughed. Then I should thank you for being a good friend too. It's not quite the same, Lewis said. You're cheerful and lovely, while well, I'm like a grumpy bear. Oh, don't say that, she exclaimed with a playful look of surprise. Yes, it's true. Lewis nodded with a smile. I'm like a grumpy bear, and not a very pleasant one at that. You'll never be as grumpy as my husband was. Madame Varenne shook her head. Really? Was he even grumpier than me? Oh, much grumpier, she said earnestly. Lewis laughed. I bet you didn't have much fun with him, Lewis suggested. No, I didn't, she replied firmly. But now, everything and everyone seems nice compared to him. Even me? Lewis smiled. Yes, even you, she admitted with another smile. Just then, her brother came in and Lewis greeted him warmly. The doctor's first questions were about Raymond, and Lewis was happy with the answers. The doctor busied himself with his bag, while Lewis tried to continue thanking them both. There, 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 the doctor interrupted. We might benefit from our friendship too, you know? It's good to have a friend like you, especially in your job, he chuckled. Madame Varenne said goodbye and promised to come back in the morning. As she left, she looked back at Lewis with a slightly sad expression and squeezed his hand. Then, the doctor turned to Lewis with a serious look. Now that Raymond is safe, it's time for you to take care of yourself, my friend, the doctor said. Lewis looked at the doctor in surprise. But I'm perfectly fine, he said. Oh no, you're not, the doctor replied firmly. You're overworking yourself and not getting enough exercise. You need a remedy. What kind of remedy? Lewis asked, feeling uneasy. Every morning, no matter the weather, you must take a brisk 2-hour walk. But, my friend, you must walk quickly for 2 hours, the doctor insisted. And you must eat well. I can barely finish a piece of meat for lunch. Lewis protested. I'll let you skip today, but starting tomorrow, you must eat too. The doctor continued firmly, ignoring the interruption. Lewis hadn't eaten lunch for about 8 hours, so this wasn't much of a compromise. I can't possibly do that, Lewis declared. Yes, you can, the doctor said confidently, frustratingly sure of himself. On your way home every evening, you must stop by the fencing school, fence for 30 minutes, take a cold shower, and then walk home. Walk. All the way to Passy? Yes, all the way to Passy. My dear doctor, Lewis smiled sympathetically. I simply can't do what you're asking. I don't have the time. Then you must get married, the doctor said calmly. Lewis stared at him in surprise for a moment before laughing. You need some kind of distraction, the doctor explained seriously. You've been married before, Lewis flinched at the reminder, so you can do it again. A solitary life isn't good for you. Look for a cheerful woman who will make you feel young again and be a mother to your child. I have a feeling, he smiled knowingly, that you won't have trouble finding her. Suddenly, Lewis understood what his friend was thinking. He realized he needed to confide in him, to share a story he had kept hidden for so long. For a moment, he struggled to find the words, overwhelmed with emotion. My friend, I should have told you sooner, Lewis said, his voice trembling. I'm not a widower. Dr. Chinnell was stunned. Not a widower, he gasped. My wife is alive, Lewis confessed in a low, shaky voice. After 3 years of marriage, she left me for another man. I came home one day and found them together. They fled in fear. I wanted to hurt them both, but they ran away. The doctor tried to offer some words of sympathy, but he was too shocked to speak. I've thought about telling you before, but I couldn't bring myself to talk about it, Lewis continued miserably, laying his hand on his friend's arm. You can't imagine how miserable I've been. Do you still love her? The doctor asked gently. Lewis bowed his head, hiding the pain on his face, and gestured in despair. I can't stop loving her. I've tried so hard to forget her, but she was everything to me. I can't describe how much I've suffered. I felt like dying, but I couldn't because of my son. I had to stay alive for him. If I lost him, Lewis choked up and turned away abruptly. He'll be up and about in a week, the doctor said softly. Thanks to you, doctor. Thanks to you, Lewis exclaimed, tears of gratitude shining in his eyes as he turned to his friend with both hands outstretched. You've saved both of our lives. They held onto each other's hands tightly when Rose appeared at the door to announce that Master Raymond was awake. They rushed off to the sick room arm in arm. Later, Rose heard the doorbell buzz faintly. It's Monsieur Noel, she thought as she hurried to the door. Noel Sovereign, a lifelong friend of Lewis, was expected to arrive at the house in Passy from the south of France that night. She opened the door with a welcoming smile, but her expression turned to shocked amazement. There was a quick swish of a skirt, a half-sob of Rose, and a muffled cry of "Madam," as a young woman threw herself into the maid's arms. Jacqueline Floride had come back.